one item that I wanted to mention in the last section, which I'll just kind of quickly mention. A lot of questions about the phase-in fee and what does that mean exactly. So if your fee goes up by more than 100%, CUPA requires that to be phased in over 3 years. So if you're currently paying $1,000 and your new fee goes to $4,000, the difference of $3,000 would then be phased in into the next 3 years. So hopefully that makes sense. That means your 2015 bill would be $2,000, your 2016 bill $3,000, and then the last year's would be your $4,000 full amount. So I wanted to mention that. That's actually come up quite a few times. Yes?
The law says that the cabin fee is the following year past the fee determination procedure is complete. I'm reading from section 609. It says the following completion of the fee determination procedure. The fee determination procedure can't end until January of 2015 because they can't certify the appraisal while we still have the second appraisal process. So reading from the actual CUPA, our new fees can't be implemented until 2016. This has come up in other management groups. Now, the National Forest Owner Association has stepped in, and every time it's been interpreted that way. So, I question new fees going into 2015 and not 2016.
It's 1 year from implementation.
No, that's not what it says. It says 1 year from the determination procedure is complete.
Correct. So your 1 year determination on, you have 1 year to get the second appraisal done. So that's when that counts for that 1 year time period. You don't get another year after the second appraisal's done for implementation. You were put on notice last month of what your fee's going to be.
Correct.
Okay, so during that time, you can challenge it, get a second appraisal, whatever, because whatever's going to happen is going to go into effect in January 2015.
Okay, let me ask you specifically. It says completion of the fee determination procedure. The fee determination procedure covers having a second appraisal. Correct or incorrect?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. In other management units across the United States, they have determined that the procedure is after a year after it's been notified. And we're
being notified right now. You were notified in January.
A year after completes the process.
I disagree. It's 1 year before any new fees go into effect.
After the procedure is complete.
So, okay, well, I can tell you, I guess we can challenge it because in Region 5, we have implemented whatever fee is going to be implemented 1 year from when you were originally notified. Whether that meant second appraisals, right, because you have that year to get that second appraisal done.
Okay, we submitted to you in January, let's say we wait that long. We submitted to you January 10, 2015. And you look at it and say, there's some good stuff here, and maybe they're right.
Right.
Is the fee procedure complete?
It will be, I guess if you want us to.
It sounds like if there's been a different opinion across the country, part of why we're doing what we're doing is for consistency. So I think it would be easy enough to check on those determinations and make sure that we are being equally consistent across all of the areas in the Forest Service system to make sure that there isn't a contradiction.
Because we're going to accept our second appraisal.
Right.
But it takes you, and we will, several months to look it over and decide that, this is more correct.
Right.
I shouldn't be paying a higher.
No, and you won't, and because we've had this An example just happened on the El Dorado, okay? I got the last of their one-track second appraisal literally less than 30 days before their year time frame was up, okay? And there's some back and forth that has to be done. I told the florist, I said, please do not send out billings to these two tracks right now. We're told it because we're going through a second appraisal process. And even though they pushed it to the, up to their limit of turning into an appraisal report, I said it's better if you hold off billing these two that are still, we're trying to finish off that process. And then when I can get the completed report, I'm waiting to get back from their appraiser, then we'll go ahead and we'll send out billing at that time to reflect the second appraisal decision. So it's only happened so far on one forest that we came up a little close to the wire there. And I specifically told them, do not bill until we get this figured out and finished and decided upon.
But we've been billed already. I lost something.
You haven't been billed on
Yeah, you've been billed for your 2014 fee.
which is based on your
Okay,
1999
okay.
appraisal.
Well, I've been told, I guess I should say. Told, right?
So with the phase-in fee, hopefully that's clear. We're going to open up the floor now for Q&A and for folks. We're going to use the wireless mic.
I'll also be reading questions off the bid, but we'll go to the field.
I'm Spring Creek Track, and one of us, and we submitted comparables in our package that went to you, 6 sales in the Tahoe Basin and 7 listings in the Tahoe Basin, none of which were included in your comps. Your comps include 2 lots that were indicated to be wooded lots, but in fact they were lots in Angora fire area, so they had no wood on them. They used to. Why the discrepancy? Why not use the Tahoe Basin comps and instead of going 100 miles away?
I'll answer that one.
Okay.
I'll go here. I'll go here. What's your first name? I'm sorry.
Tom.
Tom, I'm Lance.
Right here.
The question that comes up a lot is in regards to submitted data. The information that I get submitted to me, first of all, listings are not appropriate and cannot be used for Yellow Book standards. So anything that's a listing or a pending is questionable, so let's just not even get into pending sales, but listings cannot be used, so that takes care of that. In regards to the other remaining sales data, I have to be able to take responsibility 100% for the data. That means my verification and the validity of the information that I'm provided. If I determine that the information provided me cannot be verified and or it would not be applicable as comparable, that I won't use it. So then it's really more of a function of what I can do to give Kim a higher level of confidence about the requirements that Yellow Book imposes. And one thing that hasn't been touched on, and I'll touch on briefly, the federal government Forest Service standard for valuation is a document which Kim referenced, which is, would you say useful? Mm-hmm. Yeah, useful, which is the Uniform Appraisal Standards of Federal Land Acquisitions, commonly called Yellow Book. The Yellow Book is the strictest valuation standards in the United States. There's a lot of requirements that have to be met in Yellow Book that USPAC doesn't necessarily address. So in that regard, it's not the simplest methodology if you still also have to meet Yellow Book requirements. So I hope that answers your question.
Did you look at this one that is sold?
Yes. Yeah.
Because we're all affected by this.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason why they didn't meet the standards?
What I can do is I can go back to my file. I guess it was 3 years ago, so I have to kind of refresh my memory. But if you leave your name and some sort of contact information, either with, I think there has to be a certain filtering process, so I would guess, give the information over to Kim, and she'll relay it over to me.
Why weren't any of the sales within the basin used?
There's an issue with Tahoe Basin, and that is what I brought up earlier, and it cannot be considered to be urban. If I used basin sales, you are likely to see comps that would be double or triple the price.
No. We haven't yet.
Well, all I'm saying is that it was in my opinion that
Your opinion's
the
wrong.
materials in the basin may not reflect the restrictions that were imposed upon in regards to your permit process.
The problem is that lots within the basin, and this was documented in the information you received, sell based on the amount of square footage that you can build upon. And you disregarded that completely.
You're talking about the IPES factor or the Bailey system?
Yes.
Yes.
Bailey system doesn't apply to within the basin.
I understand it. They've taken the Bailey system out and they replaced it with IPES.
But you said it applies, Bailey system.
Sir, don't misquote me. What I said was, I'm understanding that the Bailey system existed. They have replaced it with the IPES system, and I did address IPES in my appraisal report. Sure.
In your remarks earlier, you said that we should be pleased that our lots were not being appraised today because they would be 30 to 40% higher than they were in 2010.
We can't hear the question back here.
Sorry.
Earlier, I heard Mr. Doré say that we should all be pleased that our lots weren't being appraised today because the value would have risen 30 to 40% of the pieces of land versus 2010. And yet, in the appraisal, you said, in general, and I'm quoting, vacant land tracts have not been significantly affected by the past recession. So this is quite contrary. You said that the values, you didn't make any adjustment in the appraisal for date of sale to date of appraisal.
Correct.
And yet you're saying time does matter.
It's a function of the marketplace. Well, here's what happened between basically 2007 and 2010. And maybe, actually, 2007 about 2012. Everybody went into shock. Okay, from a national economy, everybody said, what happened? Okay, and in that regard, the cash flow in regards to Wall Street and a lot of other players, disposable income from a great deal of resources you have, it dried up.
And land values drop.
No, that's not necessarily correct. Here's the reason why. When you're dealing with traditional real estate, when you're dealing with commercial properties or apartments or houses, the highest and best use is relatively well known. It has an alternative use that everybody understands. And in that regard, there's a price point. So let's just say, for example, when you're in Tahoe and you're looking at a traditional house, let's say, as for example purposes, that house is $500,000. There's a known quantity of that. The benchmark for a decline in value or an increase in value has to do with that benchmark. So if prices already started at $500,000 and then the economy went down, the benchmark goes from $500,000 to say $400,000 or $350,000. However, land values, which has a low highest and best use basis, it's already at the low end, and that basis might be $100,000 or $90,000 or $70,000 or $60,000. It doesn't have any room to go down. There's the issue.
I don't agree with that.
Bullshit.
That doesn't make
I
sense.
looked at some data this morning that showed extreme decline in raw land values, parcels, from 2008 to 2011.
I'd be more than glad to take a look at it.
I provided you with that
You
information.
have data to support your conclusion, which seems to be based, I'm hearing, on what you understand the market to be. Do you have data to actually back up your statement that, no, they didn't decline from 2006
Let me
to
help out a little
2010?
bit. Let me help a little bit more too. Within the universe of land data, in the, let's say, the Tahoe Basin area, there's a certain threshold of values. Okay, and I'm going to tell you what some of my analysis had to do with. I knew, because I've done rec tracts before, I know the restrictions on rec tracts in general have to do with what you can and cannot do on your lot. I know from a simple standpoint of in the value hierarchy of land that rec tracts traditionally are at the low end of the marketplace. I know that. So when I did my initial research, my starting point was $5,000. And then my high point was about $150,000 to $200,000. I tried to gather everything that physically and financially existed at that time that reflected what in my initial sweep of data, what should have represented initially where your lots might have fallen into. That goes on to say, I excluded tens, if not hundreds of sales that were above $200,000 for the most part. I could easily have found sales for $300,000 or $400,000, but I know that doesn't reflect your property. So I tried to keep the universe of my comparable database within the highest and best use, which I explained earlier, which had to do with residential rec tracts. Hope that helps.
Yeah, the question is, you used a lot in Meeks Bay worth $340,000, and you just said that's out of your range.
No. What I said was, part of that process, I know the Meeks Bay has caused a lot of people heartburn. Okay. The 17 sales that I used represents a database. And I think one gentleman I talked to at the break said it's the universe of data. I did not apply that sale to non-view or non-water amenity properties. It was not in my calculation. That sale was not, it was used if your lot happened to be on the lake or had very strong view amenities. And I only waited a little bit for the most part. I had a discussion at the break, and it was indicated that, why did you use this lot for my sale? Or because you had a water amenity. I said, fine. But you'll notice I only weighted 2%. Very small consideration. But I have to be within the Yellow Book guidelines. I have to abide by traditional and acceptable appraisal methodologies. And in that, I have to be able to bracket my information and my values from what might be inferior and what might be superior. I am not necessarily saying that the Meeks property is the same. What I'm saying is it might represent the high end of which I have a bracket in which I can gauge off of.
Second question is, how come the big discrepancy in size? You know, most of our lots are 0.3, 0.4, and you went up to 8 acres on one of the lots.
Hard to find small sales.
But how are they adjusted?
There is no adjustment. It's basically, if there's
Oh, what the hell?
That's not.
You can't even say it with a straight face.
No, there's a reason for it. The reason is simple. In residential arena, for the most part, a lot, a building site. Okay? Size doesn't have the strong market consideration that you might want to warrant on your property. If a property happened to be larger on a gross acre basis, like 8 acres, it was also for the fact that maybe 50 to 60 to 70% of it was unusable. So the usable site is really what I'm looking at. The usable area for a lot represents a buildable lot, and that's what I look at.
So what I'm hearing is that our contract appraiser has gone through a series of methodologies to come to an assessment, and that we have a process that we talked about earlier about presenting factual information, that if you have a disagreement or a misunderstanding or just lack of understanding of what was driving that professional opinion, that you can provide that, and that would be part of the documented comments to Kim Brower, to then have that explanation and assessment returned so that you understand either, yes, we're going to accept this as new information and do a reassessment, or we're going to provide an explanation as to why the judgment was based on, was made for the purpose of information at hand. So one of the things I want to make sure are some of these other questions. This one is very basic. I think some of you are working off of information because you have already asked for and received the appraisal packet. Lots of you maybe have not and are wondering how to go about doing that. So the question here is when will, this is different, but so if you do have a question about what your appraisal was, you can indicate to us that you want a copy of that mailed to you. How many of you in here have received a copy of your appraisal? Okay, so quite a few of you have done that, so that's good. And then if you have factual information based on what you're reading, go ahead and send that in writing, whether it's hard letter or email, to Kim, and we'll be sure to get response to that. The other question here was when will the second appraisal packages be sent out and to whom? And I think what I heard earlier was you have to determine if you're choosing to go that route. Is there second appraisal packages that we would be involved in?
The second appraisal packages are sent almost the same day the request is received by the office. So we have all of those basically ready to go. We actually brought some blank letters so you can kind of get a sense for what you're going to be receiving, but we would ask you to put that in writing, and that's per CUFA and the 60-day guarantee. But it's sent almost immediately. And we can send it electronically too, if that's to your benefit.
What's the difference in the appraisal package from this appraiser and the appraisal package for the previous? There must be a big difference of 187%. Did you have to look at that?
You mean what was sent when it was appraised? You remember from the appraisal that was done in 1999 versus the one that was done in 2010? Yes, the appraisal protocol did change a little bit. We were under the recreation residence policy. And
187%.
well, the market changed too. I know you.
The market is even close to that. You know that.
Well, no, I don't know that.
You do.
I know
You're an
that
appraiser.
things that, no, I don't. Because I know you guys, and I realize this too as a person who has a house, that I know during, and I'm just using the house thing, not even lots out in the woods, that I know those last few years we had, housing tanked. I also know it didn't tank as low, my house was worth more, in 1999 than it was in, you know what I'm saying? It's like just because something happened in the most recent 2 or 3 years or so, we're looking at a 10-year span, okay? 10-year span. We're also looking at market participants at the time, what they're looking for, what's important to those market participants, not how you view how horrible your lot may be. Okay, we're also looking at the sales and what, like I said, what the market is looking at. We also had a little bit different appraisal instructions. We were also under the recreation residence policy. And if you recall, during the appraisals during that time, you folks were unhappy, okay? And that's why CUFA was passed. Again,
So what I want to be able to do is make sure that there are many voices heard. We have a gathering of 40 plus, maybe 50 people in here, and there are a lot of hands being raised, and I appreciate that folks are being courteous in that respect. And so I'm going to hand this over to the speaker.
I appreciate it, but I'd like to get an answer to the question. What is the difference between the two appraisers?
the two appraisers between 1999 and 2010?
There must have been a tremendous difference.
Well, for one, the appraisal contracting specs were a little bit different because of the guidelines of CUFA versus a recreation residence policy. And two, because of CUFA, we were given lot inventory sheets, which we weren't given before, which was a big help, which means that it identified exactly what was on the lot, what was done, what was a permittee provided improvement versus a third party or Forest Service provided improvement. In the past, that was left up to interpretation, okay? And I can tell you in Region 5 in the 90s, we gave the benefit to the doubt always to the permit holder, always, okay? This time you had to have lot inventory sheets and there had to be proof by both sides. if you were responsible for the road, if you paid for drop lines, if who paid for the water system, the type of water system, all those things were identified on the lot inventory sheet. So that, of course, was different. Also, there was still, though they did not take permit restrictions into consideration theoretically the last go around, there was inconsistencies nationwide on the interpretation of the appraisal instructions in the recreation residence policy. We did not have standardized contract specs nationwide that went out. Some were a little bit standardized, each region tweaked them. Right now they are standardized instructions nationwide. So there are some differences between the last time it was appraised and the time before that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Lance, I understand this bracketing, but I could not follow how percentages were assigned to any particular comparable. Could you elaborate on what your process was and how you took into account like differences in access, things like that, or utilities?
I will try. Try to get into the mind of an appraiser can be a scary thing sometimes. But the age-old question or the age-old reference point that appraisals and art aren't necessarily a science. A lot of people look for science in an appraisal process when in fact what we do is judge the market. And I want to put that in the context of what I am up against and what any appraiser is up against. And that is we're part psychologist, we're part economist, we're part salesman, we're part brokers, and we're part appraisers. Okay? All of that gets mixed into what we do. And the reason why it is somewhat fluid is because the market is dynamic. That's the reality. The market does not freeze at one point in time, and we have to take in a lot of different input from the market in regards to what we do. So in the compromise, in regards to science versus art, the science part is trying to find an analytical process that is reasonably understood, that mirrors the market. So I did two types of rankings or weightings. The ranking part is the first part of ranking the physical attributes in regards to what the market recognizes as probably most important. That's why you saw location as a ranking of number 1. Okay, I think it's the reason why you saw size as a ranking of number 6. Okay, that's the art of my judgment after 32 years of doing this, being able to identify what the market recognizes as important in regards to how it determines and influences value. Okay, I also showed in the report the consistency of data within the different categories. So that's where the ranking came up. The weighting aspect is the very kind of the end of the reconciliation part, had to do with my judgment, but using an analytic by trying to demonstrate which comp was the better comp. So you'll see I might have used 4 comps or 5 or 3 at the end of the analysis. And it might have been comp 4 and then 8 and 6 or something like that. Based on the physical characteristics of that particular comp as it relates to you, the subject, I said this particular comp is so good, I'm going to weigh it 60% or 70%. Or it's so good, I'm going to weigh it 45%. The other ones that might be in the mix might, it has a little bit of water amenity, but it's not really that good, so I'm only going to weigh it 3% or 2% or 5%. It's not an equal weighting. So when I did the math, that was the concession, if you will, to provide an analytical process to a judgment in what we do in the marketplace. And for the most part, it lines up to provide common sense, and most importantly for Kim, and this is what we use in our vernacular quite a bit, to logically lead the reader to the conclusion of what we came up with. Okay. There may be some disagreement about how it gets there, but my training and my experience is pretty well defined by that process. Hope that helps.
Did you visit all the comps?
I did, yes. Sir?
I was looking for a little bit more detail about the utilities, specifically water and sewer. I think, Kim, you mentioned earlier that you assumed that the lot had water, but that you excluded the cost to deliver the water to the site. So in our case, we have a spring that's at a distance that cabin owners provided the conveyance. Option 2 is a 600-foot well. Did you factor the cost of the delivery? So you assume water is there, but you factored in the cost to get the water to the cabin as what the market would do in terms of discounting that cost into what they pay versus one that had a 10-foot well requirement.
I'm going to start with the answer, and I'll let Kim add in, I think, based on her reaction over there. This is where again, I do national education for the Appraisal Institute, so a lot of these questions I'm very familiar with, and I'm going to throw out some words that hopefully are understood or understandable, and that is, very simply, cost does not equal value. Okay, it's a concept that most people don't necessarily like, depending on which side of the fence they're on. Okay, and in that regard, to answer your question, there is a consideration about the cost or lack of cost to bring in a utility system or otherwise. But cost doesn't necessarily reflect in the marketplace. So cost does not always equal value. Sometimes it can. Don't misquote me. Sometimes cost can equal value. But for the most part, it doesn't always. And in that regard, what I did try to find were comparables that either had very limited utilities in that particular category or no utilities. And that was accounted for in my process. So Kim, you want to add to that?
Right, that's what I was going to say. On a lot of the comps that were used, they had the same similar lack of developed utilities. So if it was similar in that respect, you're not going to see any type of adjustment to it. We only make adjustment for those things that are dissimilar. We also have to look at, and the appraiser's taken this into account, we're looking at it, well, I use today's value, 2010, but that's a vacant lot, let's say, on the market for 2010, and a buyer is going to buy that lot to put on their recreation residence. Because a lot of these residences that you guys have were built back into the early years, technology has changed a lot since then. What we're able to do has changed a lot since then. So a knowledgeable buyer, knowing that they had to go and get water or maybe have some type of septic system in an area that's not septic friendly, there are technologies now that are in place that would be taken into consideration with a new buyer. So some of that went into it. So you're not going to see automatically, because I have a horrendous water system that I put in, blah, 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 and we spent, $500,000, you're not going to see that $500,000 divided by 20 lots, you're not going to see that exact amount taken out. Like you said, because cost doesn't necessarily equate directly with value, so there's other considerations that are taken into account.
But we don't see anywhere, we don't see in the appraisal any attempt to say the cost of the water system is this, but it really doesn't reflect that full cost of the value of the lot, so I've only deducted X instead. We don't see that.
Okay, I think what you see is a ranking, and using those particular comparable sales that did not have that built-in infrastructure already. So, and that's why I think he used a lot of those sales that did not have that built-in utility already. So those sales that maybe have that more of a built-in utility, like possibly that higher Meeks Bay lot or some of those other higher ones, he gave very little percentage allocation. He mainly used it as, like, I have to stick this in here because it has the same type of a view quality, or it has the same type of terrain quality. Most of it, the higher emphasis was placed on the lower cells that had that lack of access, and that's what came into his ranking and weighting factors.
I have a couple more questions up here. This one, I don't know if it's really been answered. It seems like we've talked through it a couple of times. Why aren't actual USFS cabin sales used in the process of reaching fair market value? Isn't the purpose of an appraisal to find out what another person would pay for a particular piece of real estate, restrictions and permit considered?
Okay, that's a good question. It's one I get all the time. Because our appraisal assignment is to appraise the market value of the vacant lot. The vacant lot is what you're renting from the United States. What what is for sale and what is sold on the market is your structure, okay, is your cabin structure. Theoretically, your cabin structure shouldn't have anything to do with the value of the lot because that is not what you are selling. There's some things that maybe come into that besides the type of cabin that you have and the better shape it's in. Of course, location. I mean, kind of comes into that a little bit. But you're selling, we're comparing, I mean, we've talked about apples and oranges, but this is definitely, I mean, we're not even in the same fruit family. So we're vegetables and fruits here.
You're selling a permit. If I
No.
live near one of the 20-year permit.
Okay, the thing is, for this assignment, remember I said your fee is a two-part process. The first part is to come up with that market value of the lot with all those hypotheticals built in, okay, that the appraiser assumes away. And then your fee is 5% of that value to compensate you for all those ugly permitting things you guys have to put up with. So when you look at sales of cabins, the only time I've had an appraiser even look at sales of cabins possibly is if we had two similar cabins sell, and maybe one had a different type of access than the other, different physical access. Yeah, it's mainly for access. I was going to say, I don't think I had any for utilities. That we're in the same track, and we have some of those tracks that some have either off a paved road access or dirt road access. And if the cabins were relatively the same in square footage, same condition, and there was a difference of, let's say, $10,000 between the two, and the only thing we can think of that percentage different related back to accessibility, we may use that percentage, possibly. That's the only time I've ever even remotely considered looking at cabin sales. But cabin sales have nothing to do with the appraisal assignment to determine the fee of the vacant lot.
My question is in regard to accessibility. In our tract, we built a bridge, and that's how you get to the entire tract. And we also built the road. So it seems logical to me that there should be some comparables that would be forest land that's inaccessible.
Okay, so that's not the appraisal assignment. It's not forest land that's inaccessible. So we have to look at private land in that same
If you remove the
situation.
amenities that we added, those are amenities we added, that's what you've got.
Right?
Who
So,
wants to have a lot that you can't get to?
exactly. So that's why when we look at those private land sales, we have to look at those private land sales that whoever the buyer of that lot has to provide their own access in there. The county doesn't come in and provide it or keep it up or any of those things. So that's what was looked at in some of those sales that were.
But every comparable has access. Dirt
Has
road or some kind
access
of
that
access.
the lot buyer had to buy into or that their predecessor
You bought it
had
that
to do,
way.
that's not a county maintained road.
No, but we own our road, we built the road, we built the bridge, inaccessible land, without what we've added to it.
And now we're getting penalized for that.
But it has the possibility of having access to it.
You can't look at that.
Okay? So just like those other lots, that those lot buyers have to provide their own access in there and keep it maintained, is it an absolute mirrored situation, 100%? No. Is it the best we can probably get to, given the data that's available out there? Yes.
So you're saying that the value of that has been figured into the process?
Yes. If it was, that's why we
There's some,
needed
there should have been
those.
some negative aspect, negative dollar amount taken away from the
So
value of our lot.
if we looked at it as a fully, and then you can jump in then, if we looked at it as a fully accessible lot, that let's say it was the county bridge or something that they had put in there, the county maintains it, and you guys enjoyed that access, you can bet it would have been a lot different value.
There's a question over here.
I just hang on to.
But how do we have proof of that? I mean, will that be mentioned in
So
the?
that adjustment.
Because sometimes it's not an adjustment. You have to go back to the particular comparable sales that were used and look at those positive and negative attributes when they're compared to the individual lots. Again, it gets back to ranking, where access fell in that ranking and developed amenities fell into that ranking and weighting of those particular sales that were used. Did one sale have 100% applicability? I believe not. I think the highest was, I want to say 45%. 5% possibly?
The-
Something like
The
that.
problem is, we have no idea of how he got to 46%.
He just explained it to you.
No. What attributes did he feel that lot had that he gave it 46% versus this lot, he only gave 1%? What is he looking at and what is he using to make his adjustment? We have no idea. Except he says it's 46%.
Okay, I believe if you read, before you get to that grid, that there is a ranking system of those attributes. I believe it's 1 through 6 or 1 through 7. And then for
This is
each,
important, this isn't important. Yeah, but there's no quantitative methodology for getting to 46%.
It's in the paperwork that we got. It's in the paperwork that was mailed to us about the appraisals.
Let me work it backwards for you.
It's in there.
When any of you buy a piece of land or a house or income property otherwise, my guess is that you take a look at the overall price and you say, I'll buy it for $500,000. And there might be some characteristics about it you like. It could be a view, it could be 3-car garage, it could be the income it throws off, for whatever attributes. It could be its location, et cetera, et cetera. I would bet that 8 out of 10 people do not take those individual categories that made you feel like that was a worthwhile attribute for why you wanted to buy the property, and you sat down and you said, I'm going to put 10% to that attribute, I'm going to put 3% on it over there, and I'm going to put 55% on that particular attribute. The market does not react that way. What I have to do as an appraiser is reflect the marketplace. And in that kind of convergence of art and science, I have to judge what are the important characteristics that the market looks at as how it impacts and influences value. In many ways, it's an abomination to the valuation process to actually try to pinpoint exact numbers about which attribute comes into play, because the market doesn't do that. However, because of my professional standards, it's somewhat beholden upon me to try to put some context and analytics around the judgment and experience. So if you're asking for a definitive analytic, a formula that tells you why I came up with 45% or 3% or 78% or whatever that number is, that formula does not exist. However, the analytic around it, the ranking system of what's important in the marketplace, and the weighting of the attributes based on my judgment and experience does exist.
So I got a quick question that follows right on the heels of that. So it sounds like you've got a lot of different factors that you put into each of the appraisals, and that's fine. I don't pretend to be an expert at understanding all of that. However, it does seem that there might be some variance of interpretation that another appraiser might apply, either of the same or different factors. Am I correct in understanding that?
I think that's what Kim said. Yeah, that happens.
Okay. So, and that's what I would assume. And if that does happen, I guess my question is, since those appraisals, that's talking about the second appraisal, would need to be essentially approved by Kim before they can even count, is that my understanding? I mean, so is the second appraiser really able to do his thing freely to evaluate the property, at least as far as he interprets the guidelines to be, or not?
Yes. Yes. Second appraiser has a little bit of advantage. It's kind of like quarterbacking on a Monday, on a Sunday game. So what they're given and they have access to is the first appraisal and all of its data and consideration and what the appraiser went through. So they've got that as a benchmark, which is 100% more stuff than what the agency appraiser started off with doing the assignment, which was 0. So yes, those appraisers do, and that's generally the reason why we have second appraisals that come in like lower, I never see the higher ones, come in lower than the first appraisal. We have appraisers that have gone out there and found some other evidence, some other possible sale. They make a good argument to equate something over here back to here, that this appraiser didn't, this appraiser kept it here. You know, there's different ways, and when I received that letter of material differences, which is what the second appraiser is supposed to do, because we want to know why there is such a difference. There's the professional difference, and I'm talking usually anywhere from 5 to, gosh, 10% maybe, even up to 15%, but that's kind of like the professional swing. If it's within that 5 or 10% category, it's pretty much the same because if it's an opinion of value. So if it's outside of that, it's usually because there's been a little bit different interpretation of the market data, a little bit a different interpretation of what that appraiser believes the market perception is for those attributes, whether they be positive or negative. So that's the difference. So you're right on. And so yes, I don't come down and just say, you've got to think like the first appraiser. No, that's why I don't even...
Right, so I guess that's my question is, I mean, if let's say it's an appraiser that's been in Lake Tahoe, maybe even one of the ones that you recommended here, let's say that they take the same exact information that you valued and their interpretation of what they perceive value is different. Let's say it, perhaps markedly, maybe as much as 20-25%.
Could be.
Are you going to say, no, we consider the same data and we believe our interpretation was the more valid, and so we're not even going to consider your appraisal?
Well, no, I can't do that as part of my licensing requirements under use path. As a reviewer, I have some licensing requirements and I have to be adherable to, whether that's through use path or through my own agency standards of doing a review. And that's why I said early on, once I get those second appraisals, it is hard, but I put a blinder on it, and I'm really just evaluating, reviewing those appraisals based on what's in there. And if an appraiser has made a good case, has come in and supported his value conclusion, his reasonings, his reasons for using something a little bit different, for him using maybe some costing out methods, as long as it's fully supportable and met those contract specs. That's why I have approved second appraisals in this region.
I guess my final follow-up question would be, if the other appraiser has done this, and I spoke with Lance over the break, and he's suggesting that these appraisals might cost upwards of $5,000 to $8,000. That's a lot of money to spend, and on the chance that you might not agree with them if they've used the same data and maybe not really give too much of a suggested weight to it when you hand it off to Nancy.
It is a risk on your part. So the things to minimize those risks is that I would have another appraiser just take a look at it, not just arbitrarily go out and make that decision. You're going to have a second appraisal done. Have another appraiser really go through and look at the information that was presented and get their honest, feedback. If they say they may, if those that can't, and I'm not going to say guarantee because that's not what I'm looking for, but you should be able to get a feedback from the appraiser. Say, you know what, I am familiar with that market area. I do believe, I think I would probably interpret that a little bit differently, or I have some other sales data in my file that I believe maybe better supports this, or I better, if you get one, an appraiser that says, well, I don't know, you're just going to have to see when it comes out, then I would be a little leery because you're right. You don't know what you're going to get at the end of the day. You may end up getting an appraisal of the value that comes in pretty close to being the same.
Well, actually, my question was more along the lines of if they were to, for example, to take the same data, more or less, but just come up with a different interpretation, and let's say it was a significant different interpretation, but you just didn't agree with it because obviously you came up with your interpretation. That's a lot of money to spend, and I can imagine if they're using the same factors but coming up with a completely different interpretation that you might be inclined to discount what their result was a little bit more.
And all I can, it's funny when I hear this. You have to trust me that I'm doing my professional job.
That's kind of hard to do.
Well, I want to jump in here because So,
Can she just answer the question?
I
think a lot of people want to.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have some obligations and that I have to adhere to, okay, and I don't want to risk losing my credentials, not even pertinent to the Forest Service. It's part of my licensing credentials that are outside of the Forest Service. So my big thing is I have no preconceived notion of what the values of these lots are supposed to be. No one has said, oh, they better commit at a certain value because we got to get money to Treasury. Nobody says that. So if they fully document their reasonings for coming to that, I will approve it. I have done it. I've only disapproved 2 in this region. That's because they changed the estate to be appraised. The appraiser did not follow instructions.
Kim,
That's the only reason I disapproved it.
I don't think the appraisal is a problem here, because let's assume some of us have a second appraisal, and it comes in at 5%, 5,000 less or whatever. The problem is the 5%. Even if it comes in, instead of being appraised at 75,000, if it comes in the second appraisal, it comes in at 7,000. It's not that much of a difference. It's the amount, the 5%. Personally, I think a second appraisal is probably going to bring pretty much the same results. That's in our section. I don't know about the others. The problem is the amount, the 5%.
That's in CUFA.
My comment was basically going to reiterate what Kim said. My one and only obligation is to follow the law. That's what my responsibility is. What these folks do is they apply regulation and policy to the law that has already been described, and that law requires 5%. So we don't have the ability to do anything with that 5%. I do not have a personal stake in high or low values, neither does Kim, neither does the other professional third-party appraisers that we have. But we do have a stake in ensuring that we have abided by the regulation as stated, so that there isn't any party that says, I was treated differently. I got 5%, but somebody else got 7%. Well, that's not going to happen. It's 5%. There is an art and science to appraisals. There is an art and science to biology. There is an art and science to accounting. There are lots of arts and